real estate promoters started buying up the buildings in the center of the city. They chased the inhabitants away and they changed them into Airbnbs for the tourists.
It is lovely to speak with you, Eugene. It is an absolute joy. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much, man.
Tree of Knowledge is a fascinating piece. It is just, it's so beautiful and so wonderfully bizarre in moments. Where did it come from? Where did the spark of the idea begin?
Well, it began actually in 2017 when I was in Lisbon to film a short film called How Fernando Pessoa Saved Portugal. And I was very shocked by the changes in Lisbon in the last the preceding years because of tourism. And one evening I was alone in a garden which I like very much, the Campo Santa Clara. And you see it in the film. It's the garden where Gaspard sees the Tagus River for the first time and where he's kidnapped when he's sleeping. And the idea just came to me of an adolescent boy who has run away from home and who is kidnapped by a person called the Ogre, who has the power of changing tourists into animals. And then the rest of it came while I was writing the script.
I wanted to ask you about that because I mean I can't think of a film where I've seen tourists viewed this way before, but it sounds like you said this there it's rooted in your experience in I think Portugal. Um, what was it about that? What is happening there because of the nature of tourism?
Well, Lisbon was, when I came to Europe 50, 57 years ago, it was for me, it was like a paradise because European culture still existed. Every country was different. The different regions in every country were different. And when you traveled, you came into somewhere which was completely different from what you knew, and that's what was what I was looking for. That's what a traveler looks for. But mass tourism began slowly in the 1980s, and it became more and more present. And Lisbon was the last capital which hadn't changed, which remained as it had been, I think, in the middle of the 20th century. And all of a sudden, the tourists became, there were always tourists, but there was a reasonable number. But the tourists became great masses. And so real estate promoters started buying up the buildings in the center of the city. They chased the inhabitants away and they changed them into Airbnbs for the tourists. And all the authentic places which I had known, they disappeared. Now, sometimes when you go into a cafe or a restaurant in Lisbon, the waiters start speaking to you in English right away. And if you say something to them in Portuguese, they don't realize that you're speaking Portuguese and they answer in English because they're so used to. And so the real inhabitants of Lisbon have been chased out of the center of the city, and the center of the city becomes a sort of Disneyland where there are only tourists.
That adds so much to the film, to be perfectly honest, and understanding that because you see how people who live there are just so frustrated by the way that things have been changing, and it's so rooted in the characters. I think that okay, this make that I really appreciate that. Um, can we talk about the spiritual imagery in this because the you know we see conversations about the republic, if you will, and capitalism and all these things, but it's embedded with this spiritual language and literal battle between God and the devil in this film. Why did you want to give it that sort of tone?
That comes naturally to me because I think that the crisis of European or Western civilization is from a lack of spirituality, and uh, that I think the only way for people to overcome the great crisis is to find a spirituality. That doesn't mean necessarily that they become religious or they begin practicing religions, but spirituality is something which is outside of everyday experience. And so the only way to approach it is through images and myths. And all religious traditions give you that. And so I think that it's necessary to well to find some way for each person to come to some sort of spirituality. And indeed, one of the messages in the film, not message, I don't like that word, but one of the ideas in the film is that the only way to change things really is through love, to become um, that is to because Gaspard is right in being angry. There are reasons to be angry, but you can't change things. You can't. It's tourism is a sort of is a form of violence, but you can't change violence by violence. So the only way is to find some way, uh, spiritual way to resist what is evil.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because that is an image that keeps coming up throughout the film. And actually, I loved one of the lines that caught my attention was "Love is what gives us life." And you've sort of already spoken to this, but I mean, I was wondering if you think that's true, if that is something that you really think does inspire and bring proper change.
Yes, I think it's the only thing, it's the only possibility, because otherwise we just go from one form of violence to another form of violence. For example, the French Revolution was the society in France in the 18th century was, of course, was unjust, although it was much less unjust than the countries where there was no revolution. But that's another question. Tocqueville talks about that. But I think that the French Revolution, it just uh, brought on a form of violent dictatorship for several years with the guillotine, which served as a means of justice. And then it introduced the dictatorship of Napoleon, which was in France, he's celebrated as a hero, but actually he was a dictator, a violent dictator who invaded all of Europe. Um, and then there was no political stability in France until the Third Republic, which is at the end of the 19th century, 100 years after the Revolution. And even today in France, this political system remains very unstable. So I think that it's not by violence that you can resist forms of injustice and violence.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting within this film, we see that. I mean, like you talk about the use of the guillotine that's used, and without saying too much, that's sort of reversed at the end. The effect of that is sort of reversed at the end a little bit. And certainly the tension of, hunting tourists and learning to love and even sharing of the corn, this is all embedded within that sort of conversation. I think it's beautifully said. I know we're starting to run out of time, Eugen, but what is it that you hope people take away from the Tree of Knowledge?
Um, Perhaps some sort of hope. Most films that you see today are just literal representations of the world we live in, which you can see in the real world, but they don't offer any way of coming out of the bleakness of this real world. And I hope that my film will offer some sort of hope, some sort of light.
I think it really does. I think it really does. It's through its use of imagery and mythology. I think there's a real conversation going on here about how to look for hope when things are spiraling out of control. I think that's absolutely wonderful. I really appreciate the chance to speak with you, Jen. I really do. Um, it's Tree of Knowledge is a wonderful film, and I thank you so much for your time. I wish you the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
You.